Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PLAR podcast, where we explore all facets of prior learning assessment and recognition. I'm your host, Natalie DeVoe.
And I'm your co-host, Andrew Skapenko. And today we will be learning more about navigating office politics. You might wonder, how does this episode relate to PLAR? As we develop and implement PLAR programs and initiatives, we typically operate as part of a multi-level complex network of relationships at work. Navigating these relationships well can result in successful implementation of a PLAR program, ensuring ideas that can bring benefits to adult learners come to fruition with the required support and buy-in from stakeholders. Without further ado, we would like to introduce our guest.
Marie McIntyre is a workplace psychologist who operates an international career coaching business and the website www.yourofficecoach.com. She has written a workplace advice column, Your Office Coach, for 13 years and is the author of 2 business books, Secrets to Winning at Office Politics and The Management Team Handbook. Previously, Marie held management positions in both business and government, including Director of Human Resources in a Fortune 500 company. As a consultant, she has worked with a wide variety of organizations, including Cisco, the Home Depot, AT&T, Walgreens, Lockheed Martin, and the CDC. Marie's career advice has appeared in Fortune, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Canadian Business, and many other publications. Marie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Marie, my first question is rather big picture. What are workplace politics? How do you describe them? And how widely are they observed in organizations? And are there workplaces that are more prone to negative politics?
Yeah, that covers a lot of territory. So one of the things I often say is that trying to avoid organizational politics is like trying to avoid air, because anytime you have more than, say, 3 people working together, or actually more than 2 people working together, you're going to have politics, because politics, in my definition, is a little different than what people often mean when they talk about office politics. I found when people use the term, they're usually talking about the negative side, the backbiting or the gossiping or the undermining. But to me, if you define politics the way I do, which is basically managing relationships at work in order to accomplish your goals, and your goals can be your business goals, the goals that you have in your job, what you all are trying to accomplish with PLAR, for example, but they can also be your career goals. And as long as your goals aren't in any way designed to hurt the business or hurt other people, anything that helps you accomplish those goals is beneficial. So to me, the positive politics are about managing the relationships, like I said, in a way that helps you accomplish those goals. So when you're talking about politics in general, yeah, that applies to anybody in just about any job, anywhere. Politics are obviously very prevalent. I think your other question was, are there places more prone to negative politics?
Yeah.
There are places more prone to negative politics, and a lot of it depends on whoever is at the top of the organization. And that's true whether you're talking about really, a small business, like a small store that somebody owns or a private practice, or whether you're talking about a large university, like I know some of you all work in. Whoever's at the top of the organization or the top of the part of the organization you're in, their leadership style is going to go a long way towards determining whether it's a more positive or negative culture. In the private sector, if you have a CEO who has some serious, personality issues or leadership issues, that is going to filter down from the top. And there's nothing you can really do about that. If you find yourself in such a place, you really need to leave, because it's not going to change. But I think in less dire circumstances where it's not so much coming all the way down from the top, it really is more circumstantial. It's one of the things that can certainly change the culture of an organization is when there's sort of a downturn in conditions in some way or another. For example, I joined an organization, a technology company, some years ago, and was told this is a great place to work. There are absolutely no politics here. That's one of the best things about it, which was fine until there was an economic downturn. We had to start laying people off, and the relationships got a little more fraught because people's jobs were at stake. So sometimes changes can affect the political culture. Sometimes even changes in the other direction with startups a lot of the time. As that startup begins to grow, the roles and the relationships change a lot and things can change. So I would say in general, where you have high change and especially negative change, keep an eye on the politics, keep an eye on how the relationships are shifting.
Okay, thank you.
Speaking about keeping an eye, when we start assessing the relationship network at an organization and the politics, what are some of the things that we need to consider?
Well, I think, the initial assessment often starts for people when they're interviewing for jobs. And I always encourage my clients, coaching clients, to, during the interview process, really pay attention to what the tone seems to be, what the attitude of people towards management seems to be, just generally sort of what the vibe is in this organization, as well as asking some, specific questions. But I think the same thing can be true if you work in large organizations and you're kind of a niche function and you may be working with other parts of that organization. I think things to look out for are people complaining a lot, people talking about obstacles, people just seeming not to have positive communication, when they're talking to each other, people who seem stressed or harried. Because if things are going well in an organization, it's not like everybody's, little Mary Sunshine all the time. But there is a feeling that people are comfortable working together, that people communicate well. So I think in general terms, those are the kind of things you're looking for. Are there specific things in your situation where you found politics are particularly important to pick up on?
Yeah, but what you said already is quite useful. Almost like when you go into an interview situation and you're feeling out the vibe, you can do the same thing when you approach different departments to talk about what could be done in the PLAR domain. You will also feel a vibe, and that can inform, how much you want to move forward or not.
I think too, you all are doing a particular kind of work that's very helpful to people and improving their access to things. And I think, when you look at the decision makers in those organizations or those departments who will need to, approve working with the program or support working with the program or, be supportive if they do decide to work with the program. I think trying to get a sense of how much that person or those people, how much they are in line with your goals. I don't mean like your goals of how many people to serve or whatever, but just your intentions in this department. What is your mission? What is your mission in PLAR? And that I would assume is going to be supported a little more by people with some value systems than others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's some people who really understand the value of PLAR, really understand something fundamental, such as we're recognizing what individuals bring to the table, bring to the college or university environment, that they're not empty vessels coming to our institutions to just, partake in what we have to offer, but they actually have a wealth of professional experience, for example, that it behooves us to recognize. It benefits the college in addition to benefiting the individual. And so, yeah, I do think that there are people who are in line with that more than others.
Yeah, it's just, to me, with obviously limited knowledge of y'all's specifics, that would certainly be one aspect of politics I'd be looking at if I were trying to decide who to invest more time and energy in terms of, support for my program. would be the people who aren't just going to give it lip service, but really believe in it. So,
Okay, thank you.
And since we are talking about helping others understand our goals and what we are trying to do, what's our role, it leads us to one of the questions for today's interview. So when we present our PLAR initiatives and programs, sometimes we may face a lack of interest from decision makers, depending on the institution and the cycle the institution is in, or some relationships network. So how do we go about influencing someone else's view and demonstrating them the benefits of the proposed program or an initiative?
yeah, I mean, I think one of the most truly fundamental political skills and just honestly life skills is having the ability to, and it sounds so simple, but people don't do it, the ability to understand someone else's point of view, the ability to see a situation, or in your case, see a program from the point of view of the person you are dealing with, which may be different than your own, probably is actually, because your own view of your own program is quite, detailed and intense. Because if you're trying to convince someone to do something, people sometimes make the mistake of sort of pounding the person with their view of why this is a good thing to do. But they really need to understand what you're proposing, in your case, what the PLAR program can do, what it can do for the person you're talking to in their view. So if you are, well, what are some examples of, people you might be wanting to sell this to, for instance, like finance people or program people?
We can pick any, and we can even, let's go with finance. So let's say if the program that we would like to implement, it requires extra resources and they are a little bit higher than a normal budget for a project. And obviously, finance department needs to keep all areas of university in mind. So how do we go about in this situation?
Yeah, I think if any time, and I think everybody in any large organization who does any kind of program occasionally has to be, quote, selling it to people who are going to fund it. You have to think about it from the standpoint of somebody whose main concern is going to be cost. And, some of those people may be also moved by the mission of your program, but they're probably all going to be concerned about cost. So, if you go into that conversation prepared for that, and to talk about if there are ways the program may actually reduce some costs, or if you can make it sort of net neutral in terms of cost, that will certainly help. And I think sometimes, starting those conversations, it often helps to start conversations with the other person's point of view. So for example, if you're talking to the finance person and you've thought this out and you thought, well, I know that this person may have these concerns about the cost of the program, you can start with that. I mean, you can say, want to talk to you about PLAR. Here's what we do. I know you probably are interested in, what the cost is going to be, what the return on this investment is going to be, and be prepared to address that before the person even, brings up that potential obstacle. Then, that can go a long way to helping. I think that the basic skill is being able to just mentally put yourself in the shoes of the people you are trying to influence, and think about how they are viewing the situation, and then tailor your approach to what their view is going to be. I had an example one time of a guy he worked in IT, and he was trying to convince the CEO of his company to fund, he was in IT security, to fund a purchase of some security software that he thought was very important, but he was having trouble getting the CEO to pay any attention to that. And he said, he came up to me after a workshop I was doing, and he said, so, what could I do to, convince him that this software is really important? And I talked a little bit about, what have you tried so far?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, thinking about it from his point of view, what is he going to be concerned about? And it's like, well, he's going to be concerned about, if we have hackers coming in, if the system is not working, if we have to shut down business. So, well, find some examples of places where they haven't developed security procedures, where these things have happened, and give him some stories, you know, give him some stories. So, I just want to let you know, here's what happened over at XYZ company. And I would hate to see that happen to us. In other words, think about his concerns and goals and frankly, scare him.
Yeah, that sounds very effective. The next question is related to common political pitfalls, political challenges. So in your experience, are there typical political challenges that people face at work, and what strategies exist to overcome them? Are there common political pitfalls that people experience when navigating relationships in the workplace?
Sure, there definitely are. I mean, I think I could probably go on about that for a while. In my own practice, the thing I run into most frequently are people who have trouble operating in a power hierarchy, and every organization is a power hierarchy. And if you can't manage relationships with people above you in a power hierarchy, then you're going to have a problem. So there are folks who are somewhat oppositional to authority, who have problems. There are people who don't have issues themselves, but they run into difficult bosses where it's a problem. I would say bosses are probably the topic of conversation with, at least 60% of my coaching clients. So I think knowing how to, what's usually called, managing up, to manage up effectively and make those relationships positive, that's probably the biggest political pitfall, because if you can't manage relationships above you well in almost any organization, whether it's a university or whether it's a business or whether it's a private professional practice and you're working for a doctor, that's where you're going to run into a lot of issues. So I would say that's probably the primary one, is learning how to manage up effectively. I would say, secondly, coworker squabbles is how I label them. Like people who are just having difficulty getting along with some of the people they work with, and it gets sort of personal. So they decide they don't like the person, they don't want to work with the person, occasionally stop speaking to the person. And that is eventually possibly political suicide, because really, one of the expectations at work is that you're going to work with whomever management hires to work with you. Your coworkers aren't friends. You pick your friends. You choose your friends. You don't choose your coworkers. Again, you have to work with whoever is hired to work with you. So the expectation is that you will manage those relationships in a positive professional manner. And I often say to people, there's sort of three things that I generally look for: being pleasant, helpful, and cooperative. You're expected to be pleasant, helpful, and cooperative with everybody you work with. If you have problems, then that's when you go, that you can't work out, then that's when you go talk to your manager. One of the political missteps that people make in those situations is they go take the coworker squabble to their boss. And bosses don't want to hear about coworker squabbles, and they don't want to hear about how people don't like each other. They don't know what to do with those problems. What they want to hear about is business issues. So, and I say this very frequently, if you have an issue with somebody at work, if you have any kind of issue at work, actually, what you're looking for in it is the business problem. Where is the business problem? I'm really upset with, Kathy in accounting because she keeps not giving me information that I need, and she's always late, and she's really annoying, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, the business problem there is not Kathy. The business problem there is I'm having some difficulty getting the information that I need from accounting when I need it. And that's the problem to discuss, not Kathy is a pain in the neck. And people often make the mistake of going and complaining about other people when they really need to sort of focus on the business problem, or they just need to recognize that, yeah, there are going to be some people who are hired to work with me that I'm not going to like. They're your friends, do with them what you want. If they're your coworkers, you got to figure out how to work with them. So I would say Those are the two biggest ones probably are difficulty dealing with bosses and forgetting the fact that you have to maintain professional relationships even with people who aren't your favorite people.
Can I drill down a little bit on the manage up, Marie?
Sure. Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I'm curious what advice you'd give to somebody who wants to develop that skill, that wants to, are there any first steps that you suggest?
Sure. I mean, I think that, in general, one of the most fundamental things, and this is certainly true when somebody starts a new job, particularly, or gets a new boss, is understanding that person's expectations, understanding what their expectations are about the work, being clear on the goals, especially if you get a different boss, recognizing that a new boss is a new boss. I mean, that's a different person. And people often keep working to the expectations of their last manager when they get a new manager without really consciously realizing that. So I think understanding what the work goals and expectations are, but also how your manager likes to be communicated with or how often. I was having a conversation with a client just the other day who's got a new manager and, isn't quite sure how often that manager wants updates about projects and, issues. And I said, well, that's a good conversation to have. Just say, how often would you like me to keep you informed about this? So I think understanding goals, understanding expectations, recognizing, this sounds kind of silly to say, we expect managers to be perfect. And we expect them to be perfect for us. And we do that even if we are managers. We expect our boss to be perfect. In fact, sometimes you're going to be lucky enough to get a boss who is the perfect match for you. And that's easy. But a lot of the time you're not. So I think a large part of managing up is recognizing that and then understanding that different people have different leadership styles. Your leadership style is based largely on your personality. People have different personalities. And the most effective people I have found are the people who can work with the widest variety of leadership styles or personality types. And I think trying to get a handle on, what is this new managers, if I have my new job or I've got a new boss, what is this person's leadership style? How do you best communicate with them? What are the things that are going to frustrate me about them? How do I manage that? Because you've sort of got to tailor yourself to that person. Unless this is somebody who's abusive. I mean, I'm taking abusive bosses out of this conversation.
Right.
But in general, when you look at managers, you can look at, one thing to look for is patterns. Like if you have a difficult manager, to look at the pattern. And by patterns, I mean, do many people find this person to be difficult? In which case, that's probably just not a very good manager because a lot of people are having trouble dealing with them. And you just got to figure out how to, for the time you're there, work with a difficult manager. Or look at yourself. Like, have you found in many jobs that you seem to be working for very difficult people? Somehow you just wind up with a difficult manager all the time. Well, you probably need to take a look in the mirror.
Right.
Because if you always have a difficult manager, odds are it may have something to do with you. And I've certainly had clients, in that situation. Or if you look around and everybody else gets along with this manager okay, and you don't, then it's something about the match. Every manager is a better match for some people than others. And maybe it's just different personality traits you have. Maybe something in them just triggers something in you or vice versa. And then you need to figure out how you work with that particular manager. But the bottom line is always, your life will be easier and better. It will be more helpful for your career if you have a good relationship with your boss, whether you like your boss or not. The other thing I would say about that is, in terms of respect, you might, if you're lucky, you can have a boss that you like because you respect them as a person and you respect them as a manager. But even if you don't respect your boss as a person or as a manager, if you want to manage up smartly, you will show respect for the position. and that doesn't mean you've got a balanced grape, but every manager everywhere is sensitive to disrespect for their position. And that managers who are really good managers and, very friendly, open, interpersonal managers, every manager on earth, there are certain boundaries around the position. I'll give you an example. I had a client who had a boss he didn't care for very much. And she was talking to him after a meeting, and she was talking along, and they're standing there, and, he's listening. And then she just stopped and she goes, "Stop rolling your eyes when I'm talking." And he went, "Whoa, I didn't even know I was rolling my eyes when she was talking." But that's like, a disrespect sign. So you have to, I'm trying to avoid sounding like I'm telling people to sort of, like I said, balance grape. I'm not. But there are ways you act and don't act with someone who is a level above you if you want that relationship to go well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I'm wondering, is there anything different about managing up when it's higher levels, like let's say more senior leadership at a university or a college? You may not have the direct access that you do with your own manager, but still need to, or it can benefit someone to get those senior leaders on board, to move PLAR initiatives forward. Are there other things to consider when you're managing up with people you don't have the constant or more direct access with?
Absolutely. In fact, there are 2 whole pages on our website about dealing with executives and higher level managers, because I think there are a lot of things to think about there. I mean, one is that most of the time, well, let's take a situation where you don't have access to that next level manager all the time, or that executive all the time. Most of the time, people don't, as you said, spend a lot of time with those higher level folks. So you need to be aware, you need to be very aware of what happens in the time you do have with them, whether it's, you happen to be in a meeting with them, or you run into them, in the hall, or whatever, because those little pieces of time are always opportunities for impression management, because the impression higher level management has of you and the work you do will come from 2 sources. It will come from those small moments or longer moments, the moments they are in your presence. They are developing impressions of you and what you're doing all the time, and what they hear from other people. So I think you want to be particularly attuned to interacting with higher level managers in an effective way. And one of the things I sometimes suggest to people, if you're in a situation where, you may encounter some of those people, some of those higher level managers unexpectedly, or you may, know you're going to be in a meeting with them and maybe have an opportunity to talk to them for a minute afterwards or something. Be prepared with what you might say. And this goes back to thinking about it from other points of view. Try to get your head. I have these conversations with clients all the time. Get yourself, into the head of somebody who's like 2 or 3 levels above you. What are they concerned about? They're not concerned about tiny little details of, things and what's happening in the, I don't know, the IT department or whatever. They're concerned with bigger picture things, and they're always interested in business issues. And by business, I don't mean business in the corporate sense. I mean business in whatever the business of, your organization is, education in your case. So they're interested in bigger picture things. So if you're interacting with a higher level manager, have some questions to ask. If you have an opportunity to talk to them, ask some questions about the bigger picture, about the longer term, about the strategic goals, about the current situation, whatever. Or think of something that from their point of view, they might be interested to know about what you do, so that you're able to say, well, one of the things I thought, you just might be interested in knowing about what happened with PLAR last year is da 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 da, so that you're taking advantage of some of those little moments. And then obviously everything said about respect applies there, but I think that's pretty obvious.
Let's talk about failures or mistakes, because we are all humans and we do make mistakes, and that's how we learn, right? On mistakes. How would someone go about recovering from a political fiasco? What if relationships have been damaged and person realizes that, and they realize that that affects their department, and that some of the programs and initiatives are being turned down mostly because the relationship network has been damaged? How do we recover from that?
Well, of course, recovery depends on the specifics of exactly, what the damage was and if it was a one-time thing or occurred over time or exactly, what has happened. But, in general, let's take two kind of separate types of political damage, longer term and like more immediate or sort of an incident. So I was thinking about when you're talking about that, I have one client who, when he first went to work in this organization, really did not like the guy he worked for. And I think it probably had more to do with my client than it did with his boss. But the guy that he worked for initially wound up in like a higher level position. And so over time, he had been kind of oppositional with him. They'd gotten into some disagreements about things. My client, was reporting then to somebody else, and his former boss had been promoted into another position. So that's kind of longer term damage. And after a while, my client realized that, this was a relationship that could make a difference in his future there. He probably needed to fix it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And like one of the strategies that he used, because when he'd reported to him, he'd really kind of tried to push him away, just kind of keep him out of his business, and which is not a smart managing up thing to do. So one of the things he started doing was inviting him to participate in or to provide some input into some projects he was working on. He was starting to share information with him that he thought he'd be interested in. He really tried to start altering the relationship from his end of it so that he was being more inclusive, communicating differently, and then gradually the relationship turned around. That's kind of a longer term problem with kind of a longer term solution, but it really came from him starting to view the relationship in a different light and then act accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And do some things, again, thinking from the other point of view that his former boss would view as kind of welcoming and interesting and so forth. So I think that's one thing. If you've developed a negative relationship over time, then you're going to have to think about, okay, how do I turn this around over some time? How do I just shift the way I'm managing this relationship? In that case, my client was doing it sort of indirectly by just shifting his own behavior and being, more inclusive and engaged with this guy. That's indirectly. You can also, in that same example, you could do it more directly. For starters, you could go and say, let's call him Sam. So you could go and say, Sam, I know that we've worked together for a couple of years, and I, really have valued your assistance and your expertise. But I think, to some degree, I may not have been as cooperative as I could be sometimes. And I would really like for us to develop a more, inclusive relationship and collaborative relationship. And so, I just wanted to say that, and I hope we can do that. That would be sort of more of a declaration of change followed up by some behavior change. So it's sort of two options there, the direct way and then the more indirect way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's one kind of example. Let me give another example that just actually I witnessed and that happened recently. So we're talking there about sort of a negative relationships have developed over time, and you decide, really this needs to change. But then sometimes you have these political things that happen that are more of an incident. There's like one incident.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you recover from that? So here's the example I saw recently. I was in a meeting with some people. It was a Zoom meeting. So everybody's on the screen. There are about, I don't know, 8 or 9 people in this meeting. And there was one of the members, we'll call her Megan. And Megan was talking about a project that she was very involved in and very engaged with and cared a great deal about. There's another person in this meeting, let's call her Pamela. And these people, they met together regularly and they all knew each other fairly well. So Pamela was pretty well known in this group for being very verbose and kind of sometimes over talking people. And when she started talking, she just kept on talking. So Megan is talking about this project that's very important to her, and Pamela kind of jumps in and starts to add a comment. And Megan goes, Pamela, would you just stop over talking people? Would you just listen sometime? Would you just listen and not talk when people are talking? Please, Pamela, just listen. And of course, Pamela shut up. And the whole group kind of froze for a minute. And then the facilitator of this meeting said, well, Megan, why don't you just go ahead and finish describing your project to us? And then the meeting was over. And so the next day I got an email from Megan, who knows what I do for a living. She said, I feel terrible about this. What do I do? How do I fix this? A complicating factor was that Megan was the person facilitating the group was leaving, and Megan was to be the next project facilitator of this group. So she asked, what do I do? Do I say I'm not going to be the new facilitator now? I mean, do I have to give that up? What do I do? So, we talked about it, and I said, well, first I think you need to send her an email. And we talked about specifically how that email might go, what she needed, the kind of things she needed to touch on in there. And I was just giving her the things she needed to include, and she needed to use her own words because it had to be sincere. And she needed to send her that ASAP. But she also needed to copy the group on that, because in that case, the political issue or political problem was not just with Pamela. The whole group had witnessed this.
Right.
And so she really needed to, I just call it repair and recovery. I mean, she needed to repair and recovery with Pamela, but also with the group. So I suggested that she copy the group on the email that she sent. And, some of the things to include in that email were, one, obviously a sincere apology, however she wanted to word it. 2, any mitigating factors, by which I mean anything that might explain, what happened. And in her case, it was a project she was very passionately concerned about. And that was what she included in the email was, I was talking about something that means a great deal to me and she had also just gotten back from an overseas flight. That was something else. But then if she could, to sincerely say something in there about what she appreciated about Pamela's participation in the group, and then about, what she hoped would happen, which was she hoped that this, wouldn't hurt their relationship, et cetera, et cetera. Sent that, copied the group, and then the other suggestion, because it was a Zoom meeting, was, when you actually see her, because they did see each other sometimes, touch base on that again. I mean, the hope was she would get a positive email back from Pamela. Then when they actually saw each other, she would again say, I just want to say again, but da-da-da-da-da. So that was sort of a repair from an incident kind of political issue.
Yeah, more like critical incident management.
Yeah.
In that case. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think you just need to think, when there is a political, failure, as I think as you put it, what does repair and recovery look like, particularly from the point of view of the other person? What can you do to try to get that relationship back where it was?
Yeah. Okay. The next question feels like it's on quite a different topic. One of the concepts that you discuss in your book is perception, or how can you make your work projects and results more visible to the organization, to the higher ups. Can you give examples of how your clients have managed to do that, how managed to make their results more visible in organizations?
Yeah, this is something that I run into fairly often. And kind of at the extreme, you have people that I refer to in the book as martyrs, where they'll say things like, nobody appreciates what I do. Nobody understands what I do. Nobody knows what I do. And if nobody knows, understands, appreciates what you do, then you need to do something to help them understand and be aware of, what you do. So like at the extreme, you have people who get sort of really upset about that. Less extreme, you have people who are just sort of toiling away, and they're not feeling like martyrs about it, but really nobody really does know what they do. And so they just don't get some of the goodies or attention or support. So, I think one of the simplest strategies I suggest to clients where they feel like they're, and actually, let me add, I think this is even more true now because so many people are remote, and at least in the US, we're kind of back largely to a hybrid work model, but there is less interaction of running into people and having an opportunity to just talk about things.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the strategies that I've always often suggested to clients is I will just say, well, how does your manager know what you're doing? They often just don't really have an answer to that. Like, well, he'll ask me questions, or she'll, bring this up sometimes. So one of the simple strategies is to put in kind of a simple, for whatever job it is, simple reporting mechanism, like, giving a monthly report or a biweekly report or even a quarterly report, depending on the job, of what has occurred in the key aspects of your work. And sometimes people will say, well, my boss has never asked me for that. Well, if you go to your manager and say, I've been thinking about it, and I think, sometimes it can be, hard really for you to know exactly what's going on in my job or in my department. And so I thought what I would do is I would just sort of put together a monthly summary of some of these key factors, in our work, and just share that with you, if that's okay. It's really the stupid manager who's going to go, no, I don't want to know any about your work, And if you have a regular kind of mechanism of doing that, whether it's, it can be something you write up, it can be an email, it can be if you have, one-on-ones, excuse me, if you have regular one-on-ones with your manager, it can be just saying, I think, I'd like to, if it's okay with you, just take a little time at the beginning of our meeting just to update you on, some regular things that are going on in the department, but have some regular way of communicating your results, the things you're working on, any concerns you have, etc. So I think as a regular thing, that is very helpful. I think that also goes back to thinking from the other point of view, like what are people that your job affects likely to be interested in? Who are your internal customers, your internal colleagues? What might they want to know about your job? So for example, I had one client who worked in HR and worked in a company where they had, or an organization where they had several different divisions. So what she decided to do was put together some information that might be of interest to the people who were the general managers of these different divisions. And she just, and she had managed relationships well, so she knew most of them. And so what she asked was if she could just have, a few minutes on, at their next, leadership team meeting, to just present some information about, HR that might be interesting to them in their division. And she did, and put together a presentation with some PowerPoints with some stats about things that had happened in their division, and just made them aware of some things that they wouldn't have been aware of before, and also got herself in front of, all the management team. So I think sharing information in whatever way you can appropriately do it. It's helpful just to be sure people know, what's going on. And I think also just taking advantage, like we mentioned with the higher ups, where you take advantage of, time you find yourself, in front of them, whether it's at a holiday party or, actually, after a meeting or whatever, just to look for opportunities to talk a little bit about what you do. But I think that the main point is, if you are doing things that it would help you reach your goals for other people to know about them, then find the appropriate way to get that information in front of people.
Marie, one of your suggestions for long-term success in the Secrets to Winning in Office Politics book is treating people with respect. Can you give us some advice to people who would want to do that with colleagues or coworkers that they find politically difficult?
Yeah, I think, treating people with respect, it kind of takes us into thinking about different kinds of respect. And like I said earlier regarding managers, you could respect your manager as a person, as a manager, but you have to respect the position. I think with people who are politically difficult, it really comes down to just professional workplace behavior and treating people with what would be considered respectful professional behavior. And, I think that just means, as I kind of said earlier, you can be pleasant and helpful and cooperative with anybody. And if you have somebody who is just terribly difficult, who doesn't act that way towards you, then there may be a point where you draw a line about that and you say, okay, we need to talk about our relationship. But I think, politically difficult people, they can be difficult for different reasons. I mean, people can be difficult because they're in competition with you for something. Maybe raises are done competitively, or maybe there's a promotion you both want, or a project you both want, or maybe they're in a different area and you're both vying for funding or something. I mean, those relationships it's just about the goal in those relationships. It's not about people or personalities, and those can be civil kinds of relationships. I think where it gets more challenging, where what the politically difficult people you might be thinking about are where you have people who are a little more emotionally volatile, and they can trigger a lot of emotions back, So I think you have to really focus on, how do I interact with this person in a professional way? And where do I draw the line? Like, where is the boundary? Because if you have people who are emotionally difficult, then sometimes they will cross over the line, and you can professionally tell them where the line is. Like if somebody starts getting, personally insulting, you can say, that's really not appropriate. That is really not an appropriate comment for this conversation. So let's get back to talking about this project. In other words, you just keep your side of the street clean with those folks. Was there any other particularly kind of politically difficult person you were thinking about?
No, it's just overall, I was wondering if a person did the assessment and they looked into their own side first and they made a determination that, okay, it's not about me in this case. So now then person is probably trying to or acting politically difficult, but still, because we're in a workplace, how do we show respect and carry on with the work and business case?
Yeah, I think it really goes back to just professional workplace behavior, and you be sure that that's how you are interacting with people. If people are not interacting that way with you, then you can need to enforce that boundary, because it's not like you just have to take everything from everybody. but we do have to, be professional, and that's about all we can do is do it ourselves.
Yeah. Mary, if someone would like to reach you, how can they do that?
Well, my email address is McIntyre, MMCINTYRE, at yourofficecoach, 3 words run together, yourofficecoach.com. So anybody is free to email me, or if you go on our website, the email is also on the website, but there is also an ask a question page, and people can submit questions and comments through there, and that I will respond to. Or I'm also on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out and connect through LinkedIn.
Thank you. We'll include links to all of this in the notes to the episode. Mary, on behalf of BC Prior Learning Action Network and the PLAR podcast, we would like to express our appreciation of your time and the information and the learnings in this episode. Thank you very much for coming as a guest today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.